Parker Settecase, welcome.
Thanks, man. This is awesome.
Great to have you on. I want to start in kind of an unexpected place. One of your videos has gotten something like 38 million views at this point. I know it came out a few years ago, and it's a conversation about grounding. No, I'm kidding. It has nothing to do with philosophy in any way. But can you explain what prompted you to make that video, upload it? What sort of view expectations did you have when you were doing that? And what was the experience behind the scenes when you saw this video start taking off?
Yeah, so the video in question here is giant African bullfrogs eat everything in sight. And I think now I have parentheses that says including mice because people didn't like that and it almost got taken down a few times. I I wrestled in college and I had no time for anything. I woke up and I was like, I'm gonna be a wrestler. That's it. I didn't want to be intellectual at all. People would tell me like, oh, you should go into this or that, and they said I was a good writer, blah blah blah. I didn't want to hear any of that. I didn't want any of my coaches finding out. So I'm like, no, dude, I'm a meathead. That's all I want to be. My mom made me do choir and play trombone because she didn't want me to be meathead, but I won. I was the meathead, right? So I wrestled in college and had no time for anything. So when I graduated, I started working for this ministry called Athletes in Action. And I had a bunch of time, and I was like, I was watching Planet Earth one day, and I saw these giant African bullfrogs fighting each other, and it was actually a Life series, but it's like associated, and they were flipping each other around, and they're like suplexing each other. I'm like, dude, wrestling frogs, I need to get these. And I'm a researcher by nature. I obsess over things. So I found out what they are. Pixiocephalus adspersus is the Latin name. And they go by pixie frogs. Yeah, they're like this big when they start out. And then they grow to like this big. So dishonest pet shops will sometimes sell them as pixie frogs and be like, look at this cute little frog. But yeah, I bought 5 of them and started filming them. I had to breed dubia roaches, which are not cockroaches. They're like tropical cockroaches. I have a phobia of cockroaches, so I used it to try and do like immersive therapy on myself. It didn't work. I had nightmares most nights about cockroaches in my mouth and stuff. But yeah, I ended up feeding them mice because they eat big prey items like that once a month. So I fed them each a mouse once a month, and I filmed it over 9 months. And it was just a project because I had time. I had time to kill. I was like, I love frogs and turtles growing up. Let's like reconnect with that now that I'm done with wrestling and put it out there. I thought there's not very many good videos on this stuff. And so not that my video was any good, but it's just a montage. And I thought maybe we'd get 300 views. Like that would be huge, dude. If I got 300 views, that'd be huge. And then I started getting all these hate comments like, you're terrible, and just, they're really funny actually, if you want to read through them sometime. But I turned off the notifications so I wouldn't get them anymore. Went to Puerto Rico with my ministry. And 6 months later, I saw a dude in a Puerto Rican gym watching my video. And I was like, that's pretty odd. So I go back and look, and it had 1 million views. And then from there, a third-party company monetized it. And I think they probably ripped me off. If I would make those views today, I'd retire, dude. It'd be awesome. But back then, monetization was different, so I didn't make as much. But I did pay for my wife's wedding ring, which is awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so the whole video took 9 months to produce, and then you didn't even know that it was viral until 6 months after you uploaded it?
Yeah, maybe even longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I didn't know that side of it. And so now that it's got like 38 million views, what accounts for that in your mind?
So this was in 2015, and I've talked to, it's pretty, dude, meeting other YouTubers is pretty cool. The ones that aren't super cynical and super like money driven and clickbaity. Some of them just really love YouTube. I grew up on YouTube. I learned a ton from YouTube. Like I got into philosophy because of YouTube. I love it. So some of the older YouTubers will be like, oh, 2015, that's when your video took off? Oh, that's because YouTube was pushing animal content back then. And I didn't know. I just kind of stumbled into it. And I'm not sure that the folks at YouTube and Google understand their algorithm a ton. I think it's probably optimized for engagement. So all those hate comments are still engagement. And then people would come on and defend me. Lots of people defending me. That's nature. This happens in nature. Yeah, but this is artificial, blah, blah, blah. And the fight, the bickering back and forth and all the likes. And I think just drove it up. And the surprise of 2 minutes in, there's a frog eating a mouse. That's pretty crazy. That kind of messes with us as mammals, seeing amphibian eat a mammal? That's kind of weird. And so I think there's a lot to it there, but it was a good time to post animal stuff, I guess.
I want to maybe come back to whether that video prompted any animal ethics questions, but let's back up a little bit and talk about your fledgling introduction to philosophy, the field in general. And maybe I want to split that into a couple different questions. One, were you always philosophically minded in some way? I mean, you mentioned your wrestling career, and that would be cool to talk about too. But also, there comes a point where you want to take philosophy seriously and you start reading, the big guys and studying it formally and those sorts of things. So I can split those into a couple different phases. But first questions first, do you remember back when you were young that were you thinking philosophically in some way? How did that emerge?
So I always I always pushed that off. One of my best friends growing up was he just embraced his intelligence. He was awesome, and he was we were both wrestlers, and he was a really smart wrestler. I wanted to be a brute wrestler, so different styles. And we'd all ask each other these questions all the time. What if my purple is your yellow and stuff? And he'd always get on me like, dude, you got to study more. You're smart. You're like me. Why don't you study? And I'm like, cause I don't want to be like that, dude. I want to be swole. I want all the girls to be like drooling over me. I didn't realize till later that wrestling's the wrong sport for that. I should have tried to play basketball or something. But so yeah, I was always thinking about this stuff. I was kind of a loner also. I was the fourth born. And so no one taught me stuff. They just all they thought they already taught me. Like how do you fold your clothes? How do you make your bed? And they're like, why aren't you doing that? I'm like, dude, I don't know. Aren't you supposed to teach me that? So I was always thinking about like that. My dad was really into science fiction. My dad is probably the most godly man I know too. So he always like just bringing up theological questions that are probably way too advanced for me. I'd be like, what do you think about this, son? And so then the rest of the day I'm in my closet thinking about that. So yeah, I think it was always there. And just yeah, I always loved chewing on stuff. I really was into herpetology as well, so turtles and frogs, and I'm always out by myself catching frogs in the swamp, catching turtles, catching snapping turtles, and it gives you a lot of time to think about God and his relation to the world, and how come there's like a monster version of every animal. There's like giant African bullfrogs, they have teeth. Frogs aren't supposed to have teeth. There's a monster version of turtles, alligator snapping like, so these are the weird kind of things that I would chew on as a kid. Yeah.
That's quite a diverse set of interests. It sounds like, you have your natural interest, your interest in nature. You
Yeah.
have your interest in, I guess, athletic competition and physicality. And then this other sort of cerebral interest in philosophy. So, when did you take your more casual interest in philosophy to that next level where you really wanted to read more and even pursue formal education?
Yeah. There was a couple classes in high school, like some English classes and maybe like AP Psych or something that got into some philosophy that kind of woke me up a little bit. But it wasn't until my senior year of college I met this philosophy undergrad at NIU, and NIU's actually got Northern Illinois has a pretty strong philosophy department. And this dude was a new Christian convert. He's an Arab, and so like most of his family were like, don't do this. And he was all stupid philosophical. It was awesome. So we would go back and forth, and it happened at a perfect time when one of my roommates was a really hardcore skeptic and was like, "Why do you believe what you believe?" And I had a lot of generic evangelical answers that are not very good, but they were enough to like answer my friend, the skeptic, my roommate. But then my believing philosopher friend would be like, "That's a bad reason," and I'd be like, "Well, it's a Christian reason." He's like, "That doesn't mean it's good, dude. Are you serious?" So through that, I got into like apologetics and studied apologetics for a long time, and realized like I don't like being the one to tie up every knot. That doesn't have to be me. There's some people who do that and they're very good at it, and that's cool. I just want to see how crazy the world is. Like I believe God made it. I think there's some really crazy answers, and I love showing people the bullets they have to bite. That's what I like. Hey, you believe in this? Yeah, but you also have to believe this as well, right? You have to bite that bullet. So maybe I'm not the only crazy one here. That's like I love that, dude. So I think I think I was a philosopher looking for philosophy through apologetics, through theology. I do think that's kind of a philosopher trope or property. Like, we like the puzzles and we want to pick at them, and I don't know that it's always solving them. I don't know that that's like the philosopher mentality. I think it's cool to show the world, like, we live in a crazy place, bro. Like, do objects exist? Do I really have a desk? Here's why you might not think that, you know? So,
Yeah, there does seem to be this innate philosophical sense when you're learning about theology and religion in general, because you're forced to ask some big questions. Even just the concept and idea of God introduced to you, either at a young age or later, whenever that is, makes you think about things in a bigger way. It makes you look
yeah.
up a little bit. And my my guess is that that's the a common story for a whole lot of people. When did you take those sorts of big questions and then get into philosophy proper? And I should also ask, was there a specific philosophical topic, or even, let's say, field, like ethics, metaphysics, maybe it was philosophy of religion, but maybe something more specific, that really captured your attention as an entree into philosophy as a bigger field?
Yeah. Dude, so I mean, it was Cornelius Van Til's transcendental argument stuff. I would get into that and I'd be like, okay, here's a knockdown argument. And I would see it work in, like, YouTube videos. But then I was studying philosophy as well, and I was like, this is not something that, like, Van Til made up. This is a whole tradition. So what do these things actually mean? And I don't like getting out over my skis. I hate when I think I have something and someone just blasts me and I don't know what I'm talking about. So I just researched all sorts of transcendental arguments. Like, what does that even mean? What do other philosophers think about them? And got into the Barry Stroud stuff. And so it was really through that I really like the idea of looking at creation and saying, like, I believe this was made by God. How does this point to God? And I think that's what transcendental arguments are good for. I think they're really hard to actually make them. I think they're actually really hard to pitch in a way that the skeptic will, like, affirm the premises, right? So it's just a really hard task. It's really fun. So that's how I got into it. Was I started with maybe like the epistemology side of things, got into metaphysics because there's a distinction in transcendental arguments between conceptual and world directed. And I'm like, well, I need a world directed one. So let's think about metaphysics and the ground of being. And I got in just after, like, grounding probably was a big thing. So I'm coming through and I'm like, dude, grounding is pretty cool. And everyone's like, dude, we're kind of tired of talking about grounding. So I don't care. That's fine. I still like it. Thank goodness it was right after, like, the emergent stuff and some of that, but it's all related. So it was through transcendental arguments, and then going back to the medievals and being like, well, hey, transcendental comes from something. Kant was using that word for a reason. He didn't just make up words. He had this idea of the transcendentalia, or whatever you say in Latin, the medieval transcendentals, which is not just truth, goodness, and beauty. The theologians say there's unity and oneness, and it's like all these different aspects of being. So does that commit you to a particular view of the world? Yeah, probably. But let's talk about that and let's figure this stuff out. So I just wanted to know everything about that if I'm ever going to try and use transcendental language. Yeah.
And then what was prompting you to create your own channel where you were talking about these things? And can you talk about the origin of that? Because did you have in mind this channel that would do a lot of interviews, or mainly your own stuff? Or how did you conceive of it from the beginning? And then how did that emerge over time?
Yeah. Well, so I was an autodidact, and I really liked that. I really like being self-taught. I was actually pretty prideful about it, and I was like, dude, I don't need the eggheads in the academy. I can learn it myself. And I actually could learn a lot, but I also had huge gaps in my education because I just didn't want to learn, like, ethics. And meta ethics is cool, but I don't care about, like, other stuff. So I ended up going to TEDS, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, because my fiance at the time, worked there, and I found out that I'll get to go there for free. But people kept telling me, you should go to seminary. You should go to seminary. You like this stuff? And I took that. I was kind of offended by that. I was like, look, not everyone who likes theology has to go to seminary. Like, just because you're not into this stuff doesn't mean you have to force me to go into debt to do this, right? So I found out that I was going to get it for free because my wife works there and she'd been working there. So I got 2 free theology degrees there, and I'm learning from like some of my heroes. I'm working a lot with Kevin Van Hooser. I didn't know that he could see how many times I signed up for his office hours. So I told him once, I'm like, hey man, you're probably going to see me a lot this semester. I signed up for a couple of your office hours. He's like, no, you signed up for 11. I was like, oh well, sorry. So I got to work with guys like him, and that's when Jordan Peterson was just taking off. And I was like, Jordan Peterson's cool. I work in a college ministry, so a lot of the guys I work with are like, Petersonians, and they're coming to me like, hey, Peterson said this about the Bible. Can you teach me the Bible? For sure, I can do that. But I was kind of upset that he was getting such a huge, wide audience, and Kevin Van Hooser wasn't. I'm like, dude, I would love to see these two talk. Like, Van Hooser is nuts. He could talk all sorts of continental or analytic philosophy, as well as the history of systematic theology, as well as like the great novels and stuff. So that's why I started the podcast, because Parker's Pensées was mostly to get Kevin Van Hooser out there. But I was reading all these papers, and I learned most of what I learned in office hours. So I'm like, why don't I just reach out to the people who wrote these papers that I'm reading and have an office hours conversation with them? And it turns out if you say you have a podcast, they'll talk to you. For whatever reason, it brings like credibility. If I just reached out and like, hey, can you jump on a call? They're like, sorry, I can't do that. Can you jump on a call and I'll record it and put it on YouTube? Absolutely. When can I come, sir? Like, so that was the goal of the podcast, was just to continue my education. I had some questions, and I always pitched them as like not a strict interview, because I don't want to just stick to topic. It's an office hours conversation. I read your stuff. Let's go talk about it. So if you want to get the most on my podcast, read the thing that I read and then come listen to us talk about it. And I think it'll serve you super well.
At this point, you've done, I think, almost 400 videos on that channel, which is just awesome. Congratulations on the longevity. And it's emerged from that initial Van Hooser philosophy, religion, theology emphasis to you've talked to some major philosophers on that
Yeah.
podcast. What have been some of the highlights in all those conversations you've had? Can you think of bright spots, maybe bucket list people that you've gotten to speak to, or even topics that you've wanted to address that you finally could address in some detail?
Yeah. So I've actually never had Kevin Van Hooser on. I started it for him, and I've told him like, dude, please come on. So if he's listening, you still have to come on. I started the whole thing for you, and then I can finally close up shop. But dude, I talked with your dad, and that was huge because I read so much of his stuff. So that was really cool getting to talk with him and kind of chop it up and go to some places I wanted to go. I would just love to ask him, So that was really fun. There's this guy, Ben Gertzel. He's a AI theorist, and I listened to him on the Lex Friedman show right when I was writing my master's thesis. And I was writing my thesis defending Van Hooser's authorial analogy for the God-world relation. And Van Hooser's talking about Mikhail Bakhtin and some of these continental folks. And that's pretty foreign to me because I really like the analytic stuff. But I was in deep, and I was listening to this podcast while I'm taking a break. And Ben Gertzel starts talking about Mikhail Bakhtin and stuff. I was like, dude, what is happening? This guy's a genius. So I listened to that episode 3 or 4 times, and then I saw him at an AI conference I was invited to because of my podcast. And I was like, hey, man, I have a tattoo of Philip K. Dick. I know you like Philip K. Dick. What do you think, man? And he was like, that's pretty cool. Good job. And I hit it off with him, and he came on my podcast a couple times. And now he like knows my name, and we talk, and I love that because he really is a philosopher, and his worldview is nuts, and I love to push on it, but he's stupid smart. So he was a really big one for me. Tom Morris was big. I know he's going to be on, or he's the first episode of this one. Tom was like the example for all of us to joke about when we're like, there's no money in philosophy. I'm like, but Tom Morris makes money. I'm like, okay, so you're saying there's a chance. So I really like that guy. He's just really fun. He's really fun to talk with, but then like he can actually do the rigorous stuff. I think that's kind of how philosophers should be. I think you should be able to laugh and joke. And if someone presses you on something, be like, all right, well, let me write it on the board here and let's get into propositional logic. Like, I think that's the kind of philosopher I want to be. So I see Tom and I'm like, yeah, we disagree on politics probably a lot, but I love that dude. Yeah. Dude, there's a bunch, man. There's so many, and it's all over the map. right now I'm just thinking the AI folks. There's another guy, Selmer Bringsjord, who studied under Chisholm. He's like one of Chisholm's last students, but you'd never know that because he works in the AI space. Chisholm was like, dude, I think AI is going to be kind of a big deal. So you should study logic and go into the AI field. And so he did that. And now he like runs an AI lab. And I was like, Selmer, why do you do that if you don't believe in AI? And he's like, because when I say that AI is not conscious and someone says, what do you know? I can tell them I work at AI. I run an AI lab. So I do know. And I'm just like, bro, that's so cool. That's like right up my alley. But a lot of people don't know him. He either wrote or co-wrote the SEP article on artificial intelligence. So I'm like, really big deal. Huge dude, cool guy. He's a Christian, got some really cool arguments and nobody knows about him. That's the kind of guy I want on my podcast, So I do get a lot of big names to try to like bolster it. But sometimes when you get the big names, you just cover what everyone else covers with them. But it's like the new guys where I'm like, dude, the world needs to hear this. It'll get like 400 views, but hopefully someday when the podcast explodes, they'll get the recognition that they deserve because they work so hard and they got good stuff. So yeah.
What has been the appeal to AI for you? I mean, clearly it's trendy and everybody's talking about it, but from your perspective, both as a philosopher and I guess someone just interested who has been interested in that for a while now, what do you think for you the big appeal is besides, hey, it's a trendy topic?
Yeah. I'm really glad it's trendy because those were one of the initial things I got into philosophy through because I saw like Hillary Putnam talking about transcendental arguments. And I'm like, this is someone who's not Cornelius Van Til. So when all the Christians get mad about this, here's Hillary Putnam or so just some of the other folks in like the cognitive science overlap with Phil Mind stuff. Even like, I'm trying to think of other people, but the Phil Mind stuff was always like right there for me where I'm like, I think if a transcendental argument works, it's going to work through consciousness um, and thought, like things that we can't deny. You can't deny these kind of things. I've always loved Descartes' cogito, and people are like, I think it's awesome. I think it's a transcendental argument. I'm working on that too, always thinking about that. But I think it's just such a natural point to think about, like, well, can we make a robot mind? Can we make it conscious? Like, what do you think? What's the nature of consciousness? And if you can't, then that may say something special about us. So getting into Searle's Chinese Room and Bloch's Chinese Nation that was there at the start. And so I'm like, dude, I love that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until more recently that I learned so many people in that space either don't know those arguments or don't care about them. And they're like, I think those are dumb. Like, why? Can you like disprove it, or can you like you have a good argument against it? Like, no. So I've learned you got to kind of update it and kind of couch it in different ways, in order to get them to fall for it again, which is cool. But for me, it falls into the same kind of reasoning as C.S. Lewis's argument from reason, and transcendental type arguments, mind stuff. I love neological arguments, so I think that it fits right there with AI. And so many people just go off on it, and they're like, "Yeah, do you know that this new Google thing is conscious?" And you're like, What do you mean? Are you serious?" But you just see all the journalists. They jump the gun so quick, and it's probably for clicks, right? But if you can be the guy who's like, "Actually, no, and here's why. Let's talk about that." You can lure them into deeper conversations, and dude, hopefully, like get them to the gospel, because I am a gospel guy at the end of the day.
I love that. And I think you're right. The trend with AI as almost a gateway drug to philosophy of mind, I think is a good thing. And part of the reason why I think it's a good thing is because philosophy of mind in the broader culture has not seen as much attention as a lot of the other topics in philosophy, at least from my perspective. And so when I'm trying to explain some of the subtopics and fields within philosophy, philosophy of mind has to be included for me, also philosophy of language. And there's another connection to AI. The reason I mention this is what has been some of the challenges for you in communicating the world of philosophy to a popular audience and then also to people who are theologically minded in some way?
Yeah. Um, Yeah, a few ones. So the Parker's Pensées hasn't really taken off. It's just recently doubled its subscribers, but that was because of my other channel, Park Notes. I have found different ways to communicate to different folks. I want I want to put my guests on the podcast. I want to put their best foot forward. So it's like we can go as deep as you want, because if not, someone's going to be like, "You didn't say this," and it's like, "Well, no, we just didn't get to their stuff." So I want them to be able to go as deep as they want. So I lost a lot of my friends and family early on. It was supposed to be like philosophy for the people, and it just hasn't been. So I started other channels to do that. The theologically minded folks are sometimes really hard to talk with because they have slogans that they use, and I can critique them because I was one of them. Like I get to say this, but not everything is Gnosticism. It's just not. And when you say that, you do a disservice to things, to that concept, right? Like that's just Gnosis. Like if I want to talk about philosophy of mind in a way that's compelling, I'm going to talk about Tron Legacy and the artificial life that's present in there. Like there's beautiful analogy right there. Like it's right there. There's this artificial life movement. If you've ever seen Tron Legacy, think of Cora. She's artificial life. She just kind of manifested. That's what Flynn says. And then someone goes, "Yeah, I would like this, except it's blatant Gnosticism." And it's like, but it's not. What are you talking about? Why do you think that? Well, because there's this creator motif, and there's always been I'm like, you're the one doing that because it's an artificial world. It's not Gnosticism. It's not saying that Flynn is God or anything like that. It's subcreation. Go the Tolkien route instead of your Gnosticism route. So I do have a really hard time with some of some theologically minded folks who want to see everything through the categories that they already understand, because it's scary to not see things that way. I understand that. I've been there. But like that's just Gnosticism, or that's just that. Like if you say that's just, you probably don't understand, dude. So like calm down. So I'm sorry if if that frustration's coming up, but I'm very frustrated with a lot of like my theologically minded friends, because I'm like, you guys should be the ones with me here, going deeper and luring people into deeper conversations to talk about God. Like we don't have conservative Christian theologically minded folks don't have a good hearing in today's culture, and a lot of it is our fault. Not all of it. I'm not just gonna like only do that, but some of it at least is our fault for not being interesting folks, for not being able to follow a thread and not be like triggered. Like just hold on to it for a little bit, and then you get to say your piece and be an interesting person. So um they're the hardest people to communicate with for me, because they always want to like label me with something. Philosophy in general, though, I take a cue from C.S. Lewis, where he's like, look, do the frontal attack type stuff, give them arguments, but also go in the back door, write some science fiction, write some fantasy, inculcate it into a really good story, and it'll go in deeper and maybe easier. So I started writing my own science fiction stories, and I also talk about philosophy and theology through science fiction stories that I've read that I think are good. So I think that actually works super well. I love that. C.S. Lewis is genius.
I want to see what you think about how I've experienced some of what you've been talking about in terms of talking to theologically minded folks about philosophy. And so, in my experience, I would see out there someone talking about Aristotle, or someone talking about a medieval philosopher, or someone mentioning Nietzsche or Heidegger. And, you know, foolish me, I go, hey, great, you're interested in philosophy too? We have a point of common ground. Let's continue the conversation. This is exciting. I didn't know you were interested. And more often than not, I come to find out, well, that philosopher that they were referencing was just sort of useful in having other people perceive that person as someone who knows a lot about philosophy, because philosophy is known to have this genius perception, just like mathematics or physics or astronomy, something like that, where if you can quote a couple people, then you're signaling something like, I keep up with philosophy, I understand philosophy, I know philosophy, I read it. And that's going to be more philosophy exposure typically than the average person. And so I was like this naive person going, hey, cool, you like thinking about the big questions and philosophy and that sort of thing. And I've had to really check myself in not getting jaded and a little disgruntled about some of those interactions because, as I said, more often than not, I end up scratching the surface a little bit and come to find out there's not much underneath that except for this desire to be perceived as someone who understands philosophy, but at the heart of it, not quite being there. Um, and having that deep, rigorous study of the field, um, more just sort of putting quotes out there.
Yeah, totally, man. And there's like back and forth where I like to hedge a lot because the more I've read, the more I realize I haven't read. And you read one commentary and you see all the footnotes, and you're like, and this is like a commentary on Aristotle, and you're like, okay, well, there's done a ton of interpretations. There's debate as to whether he even wrote some of these books. All this kind of stuff's going into this early and late interpretations and stuff. So I'm like, I'm gonna be real hesitant to talk about it, and so sometimes, or I'm gonna hedge a bunch. And sometimes theologians are like, well, that you're being mealy mouthed because you're not like taking a position. And it's like, well, I don't think so, man. I think you just don't know what you're talking about. And you can say this is Turretin's understanding of Aristotle, but say that. Don't say Aristotle. Like, if you haven't read Aristotle, then don't do that. And if you want to comment on Turretin's use of Aristotle, you need to read Aristotle and say, here's what Turretin got him right or wrong or whatever. But you have to do the hard work of reading. Like it takes a lot of work, and you have to give the proper like respect to those who have come before you. And even if they're not Christians, that's okay. Common grace, like you understand common grace, so you just say it. Yeah, this guy was really smart and he learned a bunch. And I have noticed that, and I do get a lot of pushback from people who are like, you're being mealy mouthed. And I'm like, I don't think I am. Maybe I am sometimes, but most times I'm just trying not to get out over my skis because I've been hit too many times, and I don't want to get blasted, especially when I'm talking to someone who doesn't believe what I believe. I want to put my best foot forward, and I don't want to give them a reason to deny like some truths that I believe. So yeah, I feel that, man. That's tough. But I've also seen you do some really good work. I guess I won't name names or whatever, but every now and then an article will come by and you're like, hey, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Or like you'll critique their use of like operators, and you're like, why is he using these? I don't know that he knows what he's doing. And also, this doesn't add to the argument at all. It just makes it look like he knows what he's doing. And I actually don't think he does based on the work. And I'm like, yep, that's amazing. I'm so glad you just did that. So I do appreciate your work too.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, so I won't go on too long about this, but just to respond to, there was a point that you made that I think is right on, where at least in some circles, if you quote someone who is respected in your own circles, then that itself counts as sort of an argument for the position that you're trying to defend. And just, I've never understood that method of argumentation. I think, and I'd like to hear what you think about that, because it seems like in any discipline, academic discipline, that's not going to fly as the basis of an argument. Now, of course, we cite people all the time in every discipline. We're not always doing the argument over and over. We would get nowhere if we had to do that. So, of course, there are citations of things, but in my mind, that is completely different in nature from a lot of the practices that I see, which is, here's a guy who's really respected. He thought X about this position. Therefore, that's the way to go. And there isn't this practice of having an independent argument. So, in other words, what I could ask there is, well, why did that guy think what he thought? And then you're often running on this independent argument that says, I have some premises and a conclusion that I can show you. And that's actually why I believe this to be true, this conclusion to be true. Not just, this guy was smart, he happens to think this, so I'm going to follow suit.
Bro, you're clearly thinking like a philosopher. That's the problem here. You need to be. That's so funny. I'm 100% with you. So there's a way of doing it. I forgot the name. It's like literary, you know, studies or criticism or something. I had a philosopher on that helped me with the terminology, and I can't remember what it is. But there's different styles of writing. One of the styles is like block quoting your way to an argument, and actually Van Hooser does this a ton. If you read Remythologizing Theology, it's like one of my favorite theology books, but it, the amount of work is dumb. Like it's all quotes, and part of you is like, well, Van Hoos, what do you actually think about this stuff? Because I don't know who's where. But that's how I learned to do theology. So I got into my philosophy program and I did a paper like that. And they're like, what are you doing? What is this? And I'm like, well, I want you to see that I researched this. And they're like, yeah, but you just stipulate this is what so and so said. If that's the case, then this follows. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if that I need to do the exegesis. Like, what if he didn't say that? And like, you stipulated it. It's fine. So there's like this weird miss between philosophers and theologians, but also the theologians haven't learned to do the argument stuff. Some of their heroes have, right? Like Turton does, and Bavinck is awesome. Bavinck also does a lot of the quoting, and he jumps into so many different languages. You're like, dude, I have to be a genius to read Bavinck. But they do that, but they've also been taught to reason well. And by you quoting Bavinck, you're not doing what Bavinck did, right? Like by you doing that, you're like, yeah, but he used Augustine. Yeah, but he disagrees with Augustine here and there, and you can see it. You can disagree with Bavinck. Just make sure you're doing it well, especially in certain circles. Like when you're at a conference or something, like be sure to do it really, really well and give the proper deference, but it can't all be deference. And I think that's what a lot of theology is looking like today. And I think I kind of think systematic theology is in big trouble. This may be a podcast for another day, but I don't see a whole ton of constructive systematic theologians. I don't think they're actually I think they're all historical theologians, which is just a different thing. That's fine. But you're not doing systematic theology. We're a new generation with new people who need these old truths conveyed to a new group. I think Van Hoos does a good job, but he is hard to read if you haven't studied under him and you don't know his sources. But I don't see a whole ton of constructive ones, and I think I would love to see philosophy help with that. But a lot of the philosophers are straight up heretics as well, because they're like, why would I believe what this guy says? And you're like, well, okay, you kind of have to, man. Some of this you have to just take, like, figure it out later, but stop stepping on all of our tradition.
That's so good. There's so much to say there. This is there's a conversation here that I didn't even anticipate, but just to echo your last comment, I think that's exactly right. There has got to be a difference between historical theology and systematic theology. And at the same time, I want to say historical theology is absolutely necessary for systematic theology. Are we saying something like citing other people is a problem or quoting other people is a problem? Of course not. Again, I think historical theology is absolutely necessary and a bedrock foundation for doing systematic theology. But to the point we were talking about before, there has got to be a methodology that evaluates independent arguments and gets away from this guy said it, he has been sanctioned, approved by a guild or history, and therefore it's okay. And that methodology, as you know, I think is not cultivated and practiced enough. And I don't think systematic theologians are taking some of the good from philosophy in terms of methodology and applying it to their field. I remember when I was writing, I think it was my first chapter of my dissertation, and I did something pretty similar to what you did, where there was a person in the field that I was studying, and I quoted him at length, and I said, this guy has the following sort of argument for something he's trying to defend that was directly related to what I was writing at the time. And my supervisor kept urging me, no one cares what this guy thinks. Come up with the independent argument, give it a structure. Why does this person think what they think? about this position that you're trying to defend or even exposit. Make it clear what's the argument involved, not this guy who's a prominent figure in the field thinks this position. And so I'm completely with you. I think it's a major problem right now within systematic theology, the trend of leaving it at historical theology is, I think, not giving systematic theology its rightful due in the breadth of different disciplines that it can employ, including philosophy. Historical theology, great, but don't stop there.
Totally. Dude, I think systematic theologians are supposed to be philosophers. Like, I think that is just by another name, right? And it's like, you're going to be different than just the speculative philosopher who has no limits on what he's allowed himself to believe, for sure. But you're like the church's philosopher. You're supposed to be that guy. So let's do it. There's a couple. I shouldn't say there's none. James Arcadi does a really good job of this, I think. Ross Inman does a really good job of this. And there's kind of a blend of both, right? Like the theologian in theology, if you can find someone that said something cool that a lot of people didn't find, or if you can like put it in a way that shows it in a new light, that's actually pretty cool. I think Ross Inman did this with immensity for a lot of folks who weren't into church, and he's like, you guys know that there's this thing called immensity, and that's like where omnipresence like derives from. Here's what Turton said about it, and then here's a modern take on it, and here's how we can make sense of it. And like, that's it, dude. Let's do that, right? But it took a lot of work to make Ross Inman. A lot of philosophy, a lot of it's a lot of work. Yeah. So I didn't mean to off track into theology. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. That it's all welcome. I liked your point that you stated before, which was there are people who, and I think rightly, have a hesitation of getting into philosophy. They're hesitant to get into philosophy because whatever they're exposed to, maybe they're exposed to a lot of positions that they disagree with, and I do understand that. Um, but I think one way that I found helpful to get into philosophy is to distinguish, when you're reading any sort of work of philosophy, distinguish the content itself from the methodology and structure. And so when you read anything, there's going to be things that you disagree with. And so that speaks to the content aspect there. But maybe there is a method of argumentation, maybe there's a structure of the argument, maybe there's even a style that you can then take and glean and apply to what you want to do where the content differs, but you're again gleaning and taking the best of the methodology and structure so that you can employ it well in your own context.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you don't have to be slavishly beholden to that either. So like, if you like chisoming, you read Roderick Chisholm, you don't have to do 40 chisms to get to your definition, right? Like, you do too. That's okay. Like, you don't have to do what Plantinga did, and you don't have to do what Chisholm did. Like, but take that, make it your own. And so I've been trying to do this on my Substack lately, where I'm like, I actually do like showing my work. I like seeing, like, showing you my quotes. I found a really cool quote. You're going to read this quote. I'm also going to do the simulation hypothesis equals DEF, because it's clear. So I'm going to say, here's some stuff that I'm pulling from, but let me give you the definition that I think's the best, because I want you to see this stuff. And if you're interested in this quote, go read the book yourself. So I've been trying to do a blend and see if it works. It's just Substacks. It doesn't really matter that much anyway. It's not like an academic journal, but I will slip them into my journals as well, my journal articles, and just be like, let's see if they let me pull off this larger block quote. We'll see. And sometimes they do. So that's cool.
I want to talk about, you mentioned your Park Notes channel. What was the origin of that in your mind? What prompted you to do that sort of thing? I'm really interested in the precedent to that in your own life, because you've been journaling for quite a while and you have such cool content advice that you offer there on that channel. It is different, obviously, from the Parker's Pensées channel, but there's a lot of overlap. So, one, how did that come about? Where was this sort of bubbling up where, like, I need to talk about this? I think it can help people. And how do you relate it to the rest of your work?
Yeah. Um, you already mentioned a content method distinction. So the content is Parker's Pensées. The method of how I get to Parker's Pensées is Park Notes. That's my study habits, my study tips. I thought people wanted to learn stuff about philosophy and theology. I was mistaken. They want to know how to learn stuff, and I think that's cool too. And I begrudgingly embraced that, but I everything started from a blog that I had called Parker's Pensées. I say it as an American swine. I know that it's Pensées. Sometimes people correct me. Don't you know it's Pensées? And I'm like, it's not. There's no S. It's Pensées. So you're not even correcting me properly. I do it on purpose because I feel like Gen X lady who goes to like a Mexican restaurant and is like, gracias. And you're like, dude, just say thank you. Are you serious? So, anyways, it all started from a blog. I started reading a bunch and was like, I got some stuff to say. I need to get it out. And it's that's actually how I learn is you probably know this too, like if you have to teach something, you're going to learn it better. And if I have to write something in words that are going to be on the internet forever, I'm going to take it more seriously. So that was how I was learning when I was autodidact was blogging. And so I would write here and there. I would write like, here's how I read books. Here's how I study. Here's how I take notes. And all those would explode. And all of my friends and family would read those and be like, this is good. You should do more of this. I'm like, no, no, no. I didn't want to be seen as the philosopher and the theologian. You look at me that way. I'm not a productivity czar. Like, go away. But that just kept on happening. People would ask me, hey, you read all these books. Like, how do you do that? How are you taking notes? How are you writing? And all of my methods I just kind of stumbled on. It was just kind of out of necessity. I had a pocket notebook with me all the time because I couldn't sleep because I was having so many ideas before bed. And I don't know, dude. I had people tell me like that might be demonic. That's like stream of consciousness, demonic stuff. I'm like, I don't think so, man. Their episode or their blog post ideas. I think it's okay, but I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in my bed for hours with all these ideas popping up. And when I look back at it, I think it was just my brain being like, don't forget these. You're about to go to sleep. You may not remember these when you wake up. So idea dump. And it was just everything that I was thinking about throughout the day. So I started writing them down. So I'd spend like half an hour writing down in my pocket notebook before bed, and I could sleep and have peace. And I wake up and the ideas are still there. So then I started bringing it with me everywhere. And from there, it just grew. I started keeping quotes because I was like, look, I want to give sermons. And I listened to like Tim Keller or whoever or Piper, and they can just like pull quotes out of nowhere. How do they know those? I thought they probably write them down somewhere, and actually writing them down probably helps them remember. So I started keeping notebooks full of my favorite quotations of Spurgeon and Calvin and all sorts of stuff where I'm like, this is going to be gold. But if I ever become a pastor, I'll have 10 years of good stuff to pull from. Then I found out that that's called a commonplace book, and I learned that in seminary because that's actually like, loci communes. It's like a thing. Some people say Calvin's institutes are not as systematic; they're a commonplace book. And so I started learning about that and realizing that this is a rich tradition that goes all the way back. The word goes all the way back to Aristotle, but the concept goes even further back to Solomon. Solomon's Proverbs is a commonplace book of wisdom. Some he generated, some he found, and he's giving to his son so that he can learn. His son did not listen at all and had that crazy line about his pinky being thicker than his waist. He was a fool, but we can gain wisdom from his commonplace book. So all these different methods I kind of stumbled into, and I started putting them out there, and it just exploded. People like I always say people like the syntax over the semantics. They don't care as much about what I'm learning, but I do shoehorn in some deep philosophy and theology because you don't get it for free. Yeah.
What did you expect it to grow at the rate that it did? I mean, from a just viewer perspective, I was watching this growth going, this is so cool, but I wouldn't have guessed it. If you had told me, hey, I have this idea and here's what it is, I would go, hey, that's really cool. I think that will help some people. But from behind the scenes, what has been your experience?
Yeah. I did expect it because I'd been beating my head against the wall for years on YouTube and realizing I thought podcasts were going to be it. I thought I was going to be the next Joe Rogan, the Christian Joe Rogan. I thought, this is going to be awesome. And it just wasn't. And I learned all these different tools for maximizing engagement on gross stuff where you're like, dude, I don't want to maximize this guy's engagement. Like but also just like, hey, if you make a thumbnail like this, it will help a little bit more. And so I don't do all this stuff. I don't try to be clickbaity because I just can't live with myself if I do that. But I've learned a lot of different things that I couldn't use on my podcast. You just can't, because it's a long form podcast. You can't do certain editing tips and stuff. Like it just doesn't work. Or if someone sees that it's going to be an hour, they save it for later. I do this myself. But if you see that it's under 20 minutes, maybe you got 13 minutes to watch it right now. All these little things that I learned about YouTube that I couldn't apply to my podcast, I was like, well, let me just do it on this next channel. And now I can really optimize it. So I'm like, this is going to take off, because every time I make a video like this on Parker's Pensées, it gets 3 times more views than any of my other stuff. But that channel is kind of dead because I released a bunch of episodes in one day. I actually, the frog video took off. I got 50,000 subscribers. I thought, nice. At least 2,000 of them are going to want to watch a podcast, and they didn't at all. My first podcast episode was on the ethics of feeding mice to frogs, and I was like, here's a nice smooth transition. No, nothing. So I started a new channel, and I released them all on the same day, and it accidentally told YouTube I have a lot of hours of content with no views. So YouTube's like, this channel stinks, right? I didn't realize that until like 2 years later. So I started a fresh channel, and I did things the right way. And I was like, this is going to explode. And then it did. I didn't think it was going to take off for this much. It's been kind of crazy, but I've seen other people in the space. There's this guy, Jared Henderson, who's become a friend. I really like him. He was doing the same kind of stuff I was doing, but I was doing it on Parker's Pensées, and it wasn't having any traction. He was doing it on his channel, getting 100,000 views. So I'm like, I'm probably not going to get that, but I can get 10,000. And turns out I was getting, millions, which is crazy. So it's been cool. Been a cool ride.
Yeah, very cool. What have you learned, given all these channels and your years of experience, about philosophy's appeal? What people are actually interested in? That's one of the questions that through this project, I want to just continually ask everyone and myself. But what are some of the takeaways from all of this work that you've been doing?
Dude, okay, this is such a good question. One is that the public thinks philosopher is a term of honor that you don't get to call yourself. So they're like, I call myself a philosopher and theologian. I do it on purpose because you're supposed to tell the audience your credentials. So if I said, like, I have 3 master's degrees, I sound like a jerk, right? Because I am a jerk. Like, why are you doing that? But if I'm like, I'm a philosopher and theologian, and we're going to be talking about this notebook that I use in my philosophy courses, then it's like I've demonstrated I'm someone who can talk about this. But I've learned a lot of people are like, how dare you call yourself a philosopher or a theologian? Like, what? Some people have really negative reactions to theologian stuff, and they'll just go like, the God delusion. And I'm like, you're just spamming titles of books in my thing. All right. It's all engagement, actually, so I don't really care. I don't think you know that I'm the pig wrestling in mud. I like it. So I've learned that the public still sees philosophers as like a high calling. You actually don't get to call yourself even if you've been trained in philosophy. I do know that about my PhD friends, and they're like, "You're calling yourself a philosopher? And you're not a PhD?" Like, I thought a PhD was the excuse to do philosophy. I'm like, sorry, dude. I'm working on it. I will get one, Lord willing. But I'm going to call myself a philosopher because that's what I'm doing. And Tom Morris told me to call myself a philosopher. So boom. I've learned that. I've learned that what the popular culture thinks is philosophy is a lot different than what academic philosophers in the Anglo world believe it is. So I've changed what I want to read. I still want to. I want to know everything, dude. I want to know all the philosophy, but I'm gonna have to make myself read Nietzsche more because I look like Nietzsche, and I didn't mean to, but everyone thinks that I did. So everyone always asks me about Nietzsche, and I'm like, if that's the question that you guys have, then I should be able to talk intelligently about it, right? So like, there's a little bit of public philosophy is like a little bit of give and take. I'm going to take some requests and questions from you guys. I'll go research that for you because you keep asking me, but I'm going to give it to you in my way. I'm not just going to like talk to you like Nietzsche did. And I'm going to give you some of the stuff that I've read. So it's an exchange. And I think a lot of academic philosophers today who are interested in public facing philosophy don't really care about the public's questions. They're like, I've done this really intricate work. How do I make you read this? And like, if you're an epistemologist, then talk about the simulation hypothesis. Everyone's obsessed with it. Everyone in tech world, everyone in AI, they all think that we live in a computer simulation. Talk about that. Why won't you? But so many of my academic friends just poo-poo it and laugh and ridicule it. I'm like, you guys obviously don't talk to undergrads that often then. So I've learned that. I've learned that there's a bunch of abstract thinkers who are not in philosophy, but will be pulled into philosophy if you talk to them about the stuff they're interested in. If you talk to them about Warhammer 40K and the warp, like, dude, you can get into theology stuff there. If you talk to them about Philip K. Dick, like science fiction is key and it's king right now. I think a lot of people think it's Marvel and stuff. It's not. It's science fiction. It's having a huge like boon right now. So read some of that and put it in contact with whatever you're into, and then lure people in. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I've seen it. You can see it on YouTube. There's a lot of abstract thinkers who are not in philosophy who we should be welcoming into philosophy by learning what they learn, or being interested in what they're interested in, but sucking them in. Last thing here. So like Dune is having a revolution right now. In the second Dune book, someone, I won't say who, comes back to life, and there's a particular theory of mind at play that allows for that. Like, what theory of mind would allow for the same pattern to give rise to the same consciousness? Like, okay, well, let's talk hylomorphism, let's talk patternism, let's talk about functionalism. You guys like this story? Let me give you some philosophy to make sense of what's going on in the story in a way that's not super boring, but now we're all learning stuff. You don't want to learn if I just told you about hylomorphism, you're not clicking on the link. But if I reach you at your favorite book and I lure you in, I'm actually doing a service to you. So that's what I'm trying to do. We'll see. But I think that's what more philosophers need to be doing.
Part of what I'm trying to do in inviting people who are both philosophers professionally, but also non-philosophers who are just sort of interested in, just like you said, thinking some big questions, thinking abstractly, and maybe even employing philosophical thought or particular philosophers here and there, is to do just what you said, which is to invite people to have a broader conversation that they're sort of already having, but continuing it in a certain fashion with a focus on it that says, I want to keep this going. You mentioned this philosopher in your book. Let's keep talking about that. Why did you appeal to a philosopher there? Let's say, so I have a particular writer in mind that I won't mention who deals a lot with pop culture, and he's always using philosophical concepts and figures. I hope to have him on. And my immediate question is, that's so fascinating to me. Why did you pull from the world of philosophy? To your other point, I remember I was teaching, I was in the classroom, and sort of out of nowhere, this student goes, do you consider yourself a philosopher? And I know what he was asking there, because to your point, there is this, depending on who's using that word. So my philosophy of language mind goes, okay, this can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I think I was picking up on, it has a certain ring to it, a certain connotation that suggests, just like you said, maybe it suggests arrogance, maybe it suggests this sort of, I don't know, very contemplative person, this figure that you said, a term of honor. And so the way that I answered that was, okay, well, I do have a PhD in philosophy, so there's one. I've written some published articles in philosophy. I teach philosophy for a living. So I don't know if that gives me all the credentials to call myself that, but maybe if you do think that those kinds of things are important to contribute to, and others as well, to contribute to calling someone that, then I guess I would call myself that given those conditions. So that's how I answer that question.
So good. PhDs go a really long way on YouTube, and I like that. I'm not huge into like gatekeeping. But I do recognize, like, if someone has a PhD in like Egyptology and they're making videos on Egypt, I'm like, that's awesome, bro. Thank you. Someone has a PhD in philosophy. I'm like, this is great, because I could go study your Egypt class with 6 people and pay a bunch of money, or you could just present it on here and actually make a bunch of money if we get a bunch of views, or I can give you a super thanks. I can pay you for your time, and now we all get to learn. So I've just noticed like having a PhD is huge. The people I notice who do really well um, with a PhD, like it goes a long way, which is cool.
You mentioned, do you have particular goals for your philosophical training, I guess in academia, or do you also have goals that are non-academic for the world of philosophy?
Yeah, both. I want a PhD because if I continue on as an autodidact, there are just things like I'm back to it. So I don't know if it's legit that I'm an autodidact, but I taught myself philosophy, and then I had really great professors who corrected a lot of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can only learn. The wisdom stuff, the understanding stuff, that comes from like people who've thought about this a long time. You can get the knowledge, you can read the books, but a lot of times it's like, well, actually, this is even pronounced this way. And if you say this at a conference, you're going to get laughed at. So we all pronounce it this way. Just so you know, those little like inside things, as well as like, here's how you think through, or here's how you formalize an argument, or that formalization that you read in that book is actually super obscure, and I'd never even heard of it. So don't do it that way. Little things like that. But I'd like to go on and continue my learning. And if I do it in a PhD program, I think that kind of use stress and expectation, and maybe it's naive, but dude, I do want to add to like the human knowledge, right? That's what a PhD is supposed to be. Like we recognize you as a doctor, a teacher of this subject because you've added to the field. You're someone who is my peer now. I would like to do that. I also think it would go a long way for my job, which is YouTube. It's a shortcut for people who are wondering if they can trust me. Yeah, you can trust me insofar as you trust a PhD, right? So like now you have to actually listen to what I say. Don't just take it on my authority. But if you're looking through a bunch of people and you see one has a PhD in philosophy, and I'm looking for someone to study philosophy from, I'll start here. So it is like a shorthand, which I think is really great. And this is my job. So this is the plan A. The plan B has now become the plan A job for me. I don't think I'll teach philosophy, but I would like to teach adjunct. I don't think I'll be a full professor or anything like that, but I would love to teach adjunct. I'd love to teach adjunct at Christian seminaries as well. If I'm gonna, badmouth all my theologian friends, I should be willing to help out the master's students as well. So there's a bunch of reasons why I want to go get one. I don't know if God's gonna open the door. It's crazy out there. I applied to one program. I won't say. There was I think there was like 450 applicants, and there was only a couple slots. And you like, I felt really bad about that. I'm like, dude, maybe I suck at philosophy. I had really good letters from really famous philosophers from my podcast. I had the writing sample I got is now published in a journal, so it was a good writing sample, like all the stuff. And I was thinking about, I'm like, maybe I suck. Like, dude, with that many people, maybe they didn't even see my application. Like, maybe they just didn't see it. So at the end of the day, it's more obvious to me that it's a God thing. If he wants me to go on, then he'll, put it to the top of the pile, and we'll see. If not, then I won't. And I don't really need to go to like a top 6 school or anything like that. Like, I just want to keep learning. So I'll go wherever. But if the door closes, then no big deal. I'll just keep learning and keep talking with guys like you, and you can teach me stuff.
I will say the application process for philosophy PhD programs is just absolutely insane. And yes, it can, the final decision on any one applicant has such a range of relevant and kind of non relevant factors. I mean, it could be just the slot that was taken up by this guy, and you're like a perfect candidate for that. But this guy was just ahead of you this time. But you next go around, maybe you're the person who gets in that first slot. I know so many cases where that has happened. And so I always tell people when they ask me about that application process that as long as you are submitting the kinds of things that you're talking about, good references, good sample paper, and those check marks are those boxes are checked, then it's just never worth it to go, what could I have done that's better quality and that would have put me over? So often you are playing, not you, but like someone is playing guessing games with a committee, and the committee could just have all kinds of factors that you had never even heard about, and that might even be particular to that day and a conversation that they had that they didn't even anticipate. So it can just appear pretty random at times, unfortunately, which sometimes is really frustrating when you're in the middle of all that.
So getting my, I have one paper published in a theology journal from my master's thesis, and one in a AI journal and AI and consciousness journal. So I'm like, look, those were two things that were huge for me. If I'm going to call myself a theologian and a philosopher, I should be able to do those kind of things. So those are some of my goals now. Whether or not I get into a program or not, whether or not I get into a program, I would like to continue trying to publish and present at places. And if that's the case, then I feel okay. Like people in those positions I would like to be in say that my stuff's good enough to present or good enough to accept in a journal. Like, that's cool. Then that's a signal to me that I'm doing at least good work, that I'm on track. Even if I don't get in, it's all good. So yeah, I have some pretty unrealistic goals, but I'm like, it'd be nice to publish one paper a quarter. And I think that's pretty high. That's pretty wild, but I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'll probably have to adjust that a little bit, but we'll see. Yeah.
Publishing in a philosophy journal is exceptionally difficult too, depending on the journal. But if the journal is decent, yeah, it is really difficult to do that. So major congrats on that achievement. That's a big deal. You also talk about your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, and I wonder, how did that start? You mentioned wrestling in college, and I have to think there's some pretty direct line between your wrestling experience and then your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu experience. So number one, how did that get started for you? And then second, do you see any sort of connecting threads between your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training and your philosophical interests?
Yeah. So I started wrestling in first grade. I have two brothers, two older brothers and an older sister, and my oldest brother is 8 years older than me, and then 6. So we all started the same year, but I was in first grade, and they used to just womp on me all the time, and I was like, dude, I'm gonna kill you guys someday. And then I got bigger and stronger than them, and I'd wrestled for way longer than them, and I was finally like, dude, it's time. Sophomore year of college, I was like 260. I'm like, I'm gonna destroy you guys. My dad's like, you can't do that, man. Your oldest brother will never come back from it, and your second oldest brother might get a gun. And so he's like, you can't fight your brothers. I did end up taking them both down one Christmas, which was sick. But I didn't know about jiu-jitsu except through Joe Rogan, and I'd liked some UFC stuff. I still go back and forth of like, bro, is this gladiatorial? Should image bearers be destroying each other like this? I don't know. But I had heard of jiu-jitsu, and I didn't really realize how close it was to American folk style wrestling that I'd grown up in. And it's very, very close. They all have, if you believe certain people, they all have the same origin, which came from this dude in Japan, and then he spread it all around the world. He was like a evangelist for this type of Japanese jiu-jitsu that turned into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so American folk style came from English catch as catch can wrestling, which came from like I don't know if they had coal workers or what, but like the blue collar dudes would just wrestle each other after work, and they were submitting each other, and it was catch as catch can. It's you catch them any way you can in submissions or pin them or whatever. And in America, we were like, hey, that's pretty low class. Like, you shouldn't be choking each other. So we made it more of a sport, and we took out all the strangleholds and the joint locks, but they're still there. So like now it's a really natural progression back into it, because I'm like, I always got in trouble from the ref for accidentally choking someone in this position. That's because it's very natural to choke someone in that position. So now I get to do it, which is great. Um, but a lot of times people will be like, yeah, jujitsu is like chess, or it's like, philosophy. And it's true, but it is different too, right? Like you're thinking ahead, but you're thinking with your body. A lot of times my best moves, I'm not thinking about. And so people are like, dude, that was sick. And I'm like, I can't really take credit for it. I don't really know why I did that. Like it just years and years of doing it. But I will say I've had really amazing philosophical and theological conversations with the people in my gym after jujitsu. And jiu-jitsu is really, really cool, respectful place. There's some dudes who are jerks, but on the whole, it's really odd that so many people who are trying to kill each other and strangle each other are all such good friends afterwards. There's just like this mutual respect because you can't really talk smack when you know that little 130-pound girl can choke you out. Like, and she just did. So you can't really like be mean to her after she did that. So all the like pretensions of here's who I am in society kind of go away when you're faced with combat like that. So dude, I witness a lot after jiu-jitsu practice, and I talk about all sorts of philosophical stuff. I've set myself up as the philosopher. Like they know that about me, so they're like, "Dude, give us something good." I'm like, "All right, let's talk about chairs. Like, do you think chairs exist? Like, could God put my soul in a desk? Let's talk about goofy stuff, and then we get in deep. You know, I how can God exist if there's evil? Like, well, I think God relates to the world like an author does to a story. Like, would you take Smeagol out of Lord of the Rings? Let's talk about that. So, dude, I've had so many good ones and developed really good relationships from that. And so, I do see like more abstract thinker type folks get into jujitsu, and that's because you can pick your style. You can be a nerd and like a super dork and learn all the jujitsu moves and be very, very good. You can also be a brute and just throw a dude into a wall, and that's cool too. So it does attract more abstract thinkers than just wrestling does because it is a little bit different. So yeah, I've noticed that, and it's cool. I tell a lot of pastors, I'm like, you guys don't have any non-Christian friends and you want to witness to people, you have to do jujitsu. Like you have to. It'll be good for your ego too. Like getting submitted by a little guy will help you out. You need that. So I always tell pastors that's what they need to do.
You went to metaphysics and object theory. I did not expect that. I thought you were going to say something about flourishing, something in the ethical
Nah.
domain or normative domain, and what success looks like, and the virtue and the ideal life. But you went to object
No.
theory.
Yeah, dude, they love that stuff, man. It's they love it, and it's just kind of part of the culture is now it's like smoking weed in America. So they're like, some of them are like stoners, and you're like, dude, I can go in stoner questions. I love stoner questions. Let's do that. I'm not gonna smoke with you, but yeah, do aliens exist? And if they do, does that mess with my Christian faith? I'm a Christian, so I think they'd be made in God's image if they were able to make that kind of equipment, but maybe not. Maybe they're unfallen. I don't. What do you think? And now I'm asking them theological questions, and it is philosophical still. But dude, I'm a systematic theologian by training as well, so I like getting into that stuff, and I want to get into the gospel because I'm an evangelical. So I don't know, dude. This is like a philosophy podcast, so hopefully I'm not going too deep into the evangelical stuff.
No, it's all up for grabs for sure. You mentioned a few people so far. Who are the creators that you consume, look up to, even model yourself after, if it falls into that category? Podcasters, anybody that you are regularly paying attention to and learning from in the creator space.
Yeah. I did learn. So Park Notes, I do take a lot of notes from Mr. Beast, and just like everyone. But again, like I said, you have to make it your own. So I'm not just gonna be like, "What's up, YouTube? How's it?" Like I can't live with myself if I do that. But I do know that there's certain things you need a couple cuts in the first 30 seconds because that helps people pay attention more. And if I can think about it as helping them pay attention and not hacking their psychology in order to make them watch a bunch of crap that they don't want to watch. Like I'm trying to help you with stuff. So if I can help you, then that's cool. If you don't want to watch my stuff, don't watch it. Um, so Mr. Beast for the Park Notes. I mentioned Jared Henderson. Me and him have we have different content. It's pretty closely related, but we have different views on all of it. So like even the science fiction people we like, I had him on my show the other day. I was like, what do you think about Philip K. Dick? And he's like, dude, I don't think he's good at all. And I'm like wearing a Philip K. Dick shirt. I have like a Philip K. Dick tattoo on my arm. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Next question. So Jared Henderson's super cool. Dude, I like Cal Newport stuff. He's not the best at producing YouTube stuff, but that kind of fits. That's kind of on brand for him. I really like him, man. Some people think he's like a grifter. I don't see that at all. I think he's really helpful, and I think he really knows what he's talking about. So he's another good one. Um, as far as like influences on me, I was very much influenced by Joe Rogan and his style of podcasting, where he's like, we're just gonna talk. A lot of times he reads their stuff beforehand. Not every time, but he's like, yeah, you said that, and I don't know, dude. Like, say what you will about the guy, but he'll talk about like deep cosmology stuff, and you're like, yeah, this guy's dumb. Like, I don't know, man. He's got a great memory, at least. Maybe his like reasonings, maybe like making connections aren't, and maybe he's a little bit more willing to go down like a really crazy rabbit trail. And his priors on theism are nuts because he's like, yeah, maybe directed panspermia. Like, well, why not theism? I don't understand why you don't believe in God. Like, so whatever. But his style of just going there and letting the conversation flow, I think is awesome. I think that's what podcasts should be. Kind of like we're doing now, dude. Like just go there. So that was the style. And then Lex Friedman is another big one where I'm like so jealous of that dude because all of his guests. I'm like, I'd rather have his guests than Rogan's guests for sure. They're a lot of times they're similar, but so many times I'm like, dude, let me just be God. Can we just like trade places, please? Um, and I get so jealous of him. I have to like repent of it all the time. But yeah, I listen to him and I've learned a ton from his channel. So those are like the ones who have influenced my podcast. And then Park Notes is kind of the Wild West. I'm just discovering stuff and like trying to figure things out. And people come to me, a lot of people will come to me and be like, dude, this is so successful. What did you do? Can you help me? I'm like, I can't. I don't understand it either. I had some intuitions about this and they worked, but a lot of things are down right now and I don't know why. And so yeah, dude, it's a wild. YouTube's crazy. I'm not sure that anyone really does understand it.
Do you think there's a parallel to what we were talking about before with philosophy and podcasters, where you can take some of the practices, tactics, methodology, some of the good that they're doing, and not go along with a lot of or some of the content there? That sort of approach applies not only to sort of academic and philosophy, but also just the types of pieces of culture that we consume.
I think so, man. And I think if you're an analytic philosopher, you need to unlearn some of the way that you interact with people. Um, you still need people skills, right? Like you still have to respect people, and like you need social skills. So many dudes like they think that if I give you a contradiction, then you need to like clap for me, and it's like, hey, I didn't really ask for that right now. We're this is not a public like talk to me like a human being, bro. And if you were wise and you wanted to make your point, you would do it in a way that's not like this. So I think a lot of philosophers, if they want to get into podcasting, they can learn from that, and they can learn from Rogan as hard as that would be. He's a pretty good conversationalist. Yeah, he steps on his, but he's done so many hours. Respecting people, asking people like, hey, how'd you come to that idea? Instead of being like, well, you said this and this, but that's contradictory. It's like, show them. If you really want to convince them, you have to be persuasive. And I think that is something that might be missing in academic philosophy nowadays is like the art of persuasion. And I only know that because of like Os Guinness talking about being persuasive in evangelism. I'm like, oh, well, if that works there, I want to persuade someone of an idea and actually persuade them and not roast them in front of an audience, because that's a different motif. That's a different mode of doing things. If I want to convince them, then I actually have to give them a way out sometimes, right? Like if I just pin you on something right now, there's no way you're going to change your mind. But if I'm like, I could be wrong, dude. What do you think about that? And you give them an out, then they're going to be more willing to come around to your side of things. So it's also just really hard to listen to academic philosophy podcasts when you're not reading the paper. Like it's hard. That's why we write stuff down, and that's why we use notations when we need to use notations and stuff. So it's just really hard if you're going to go that route. So I always recommend people like keep it a little bit more high level and recommend that the audience reads the paper beforehand or after. Like read the paper. We can't get into all of this stuff, but here's some things we can get into. And it's actually really fascinating to find out how you came up with this idea, right? Like how'd you come up? Were you in the shower or what? Like how'd you even come up with this crazy idea? Like Jonathan Schaffer talking about like grounding kind of started a whole thing. it's kind of fascinating. Like, why nobody wanted to talk about grounding, and you wrote this paper and then turned it into a book? Like, how'd that happen? So I think some of that background stuff is really important, even though it's not like pure argumentation going back and forth and showing that you know everything. Yeah.
When I had Tom Morris on, it was so refreshing to hear him say that at least part of the reason philosophy isn't as popular as it maybe should be, it's largely the fault of philosophers. Because as you mentioned, there are so many philosophers who aren't able to talk to the average person who's not a philosopher, a non-philosopher, about what they're working on in a way that is accessible. Now, there are plenty of philosophers who can do that. They do exist out there, and they end up on some of the podcasts that you and I both pay attention to, and that's great. But at least in my experience and in Tom's experience as well, there are too many philosophers who talk to other people like they're talking to other academic philosopher professors, or like when they were a grad student, and it's they're not getting into the mind of the other person and empathizing with them and going, how can I communicate this sort of thing with a vocabulary and language that meets them where they are?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think that philosopher is a role in society, and since we don't have that role being fulfilled by philosophers, someone else is going to fill that, and they're not going to be as good, and it's going to be kind of bad. I think Jordan Peterson is like a rose up to the point of like being the philosopher. I don't think we need one. I think we need a whole group of them arguing with each other and with others. I think they should go for the throat when the sociologist is saying that everyone's just meatbags in motion. Like, well, what do you mean by that, right? On stage, that sounds great. But Peterson then goes off into weird politics, and everyone hates him now. And it's like, well, dang it, that was our one role. Like, okay, so I do think it's a role. But just like you're saying, like it's actually too important for you to fall back on your rigorous academic training and language in the public realm. I understand the temptation to go there if you're being challenged and be like, well, actually, dude, you don't even understand. Let me turn this into propositional logic or whatever. Like, let me show you how much you don't understand. It's like, well, dude, I get it, but it's actually too important for you to do that because they're not going to understand. You need to be better. You have to be the one who's the adult in the room and stick with it and show them in a way that doesn't make you look like a pompous jerk, because philosophy and that role is too important for you to blow it for the rest of us. I also think that you got to be winsome. And that's something that's really, I mean, dude, that's like a character thing. That's really hard to learn. And I think a lot of the like analytic philosophy draws in people who are really, really smart and mathematically minded. And sometimes that doesn't come with like being winsome and jokey. And I think we do need winsome and jokiness. Have you heard of Sidney Morgenbesser at all? He's pretty obscure dude, but he's written some good stuff. There's this probably apocryphal story about him and J.L. Austin. I choose to believe it. I don't really care. I think it's true, or I want it to be true. Where Austin is like the analytic of analytics, starting off like this language philosophy and how to do things with words, speech act theory. And Morgenbesser, as the story goes, is like, hey, I can get a negative from two affirmatives. Like I can say two positive things and get a negative. And he's like, no, you can't do that. You can say not and get a positive, but you can't get a negative from two positives. That doesn't make sense. I'm talking with the language guy here, so this may come out wrong. But as the story goes, they got together and probably at Oxford, and Austin's on the board showing like why that's not the case, why you could never get a negative from two positives. And at the end, he goes, now, what do you think? And Sidney Morgenbesser goes, yeah. And it's like, that's so amazing. Like, yeah, just dismissing, right? Like it's a negative thing, but he's saying, yeah, but that's like the connotation there, right? So that's witty and winsome, and you just set him up like that's hilarious. That's not what you think of in academic philosophy, but this guy was a really rigorous philosopher who could also joke. I think that's the kind of philosopher we need, man.
I want to ask too about something else that you're admirably vocal about, and you have talked about in various contexts the struggles that you've had in trying to get pregnant. And I wonder what has been the motivation for you for being public about that sort of thing. I think I know, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And again, I just want to praise you for talking about those sorts of things publicly because I think it helps a lot of people. But as you, Parker, experiencing that sort of thing in your life and talking about it, what was that experience like for you? And did it help other people?
Yeah. Yeah, man. So I hate small talk. I can't do it. And some of that's the weird philosopher in me. Some of it's natural, right? Because I'm like, let's talk about cool stuff. I have a bunch of weird turtles in my basement and stuff. They're endangered species. Let's talk about those instead of just the bears. But also some of it's my being malformed by studying analytic philosophy, and that's part of it too. But if someone asks me how I'm doing, I feel like it's really hard for me to say yes or say good if it's not good. It just is. I could, but I'm also like, you asked. I know that this was probably not real, but you did ask me. So that does have meaning. And I'm going to tell you, not great. So, in just being honest with like, hey, things are pretty bad, dude. I kind of want to like die today. I wish a meteor would hit me. I don't want to like off myself. I don't want to like commit suicide or anything. But if a truck hit me today, I think I'd be okay with that. Um, just being like, I'm not doing well. I need help. And they're like, why? What's going on? And I'm like, my wife is struggling with infertility. She has a particularly difficult form of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Hers is like the skinny one or whatever they call it. A lot of Olympians have this because it gives you more androgen, and so you get like my wife's pretty jacked. She's got big old shoulders. She's tiny, but she's got guns. A lot of female athletes have this, and I'm like, really? Like, I know so many I went to Division 1 wrestling program. I know a bunch of these girls. I know a bunch of the gymnasts and stuff. Like, you're telling me they all like have this and no one talks about it? This is crazy. I work with athletes in a ministry, so I just realized like so many more people have this, and then other forms of PCOS, and then on top of that, they have, dude, so many ladies have so many problems where they can't get pregnant and they don't talk about it because there's all this like shame. I'm not going to be the one to make them talk about it, but I would love for other people to be sensitive about it. I would love for pastors to know that a good portion of their congregation is probably struggling with infertility. So when they use father analogies over and over and talking about like that's the purpose of humanity, like, can you stop? Can you just be sensitive to it? At least say like, I understand that people are struggling with it, and this is not part of God's good plan, and do a sermon on that every now and then. We have examples of barren women and God opening up the womb, but are there examples of them never being fulfilled? Like, some people just aren't going to have that fulfilled. And a lot of Christians will say, just just adopt. Why don't you just adopt? Like, yeah, I want to adopt, dude, but you have kids. Why didn't you just adopt? There's some weird existential stuff that happened to me where I'm like, if I can't pass on my genes, then what's the point of this? I'm like, that's so weird. That doesn't feel like me. I didn't think that was me. But I'm like, I don't want to study philosophy anymore. I don't want to study theology. Like, I don't care about any of this because I'm not going to be able to teach anyone this stuff. I'm not going to be able to pass on. Like, what's the point of saving up a bunch of money if I'm just going to die and it's gone? I want to care for my wife, but like, we're not going to be able to like replace ourselves. What the heck, dude? I'm not going to get to spread my genes down the. So there's a lot of that happened. But in talking with people, I realized there's a lot more people struggling with infertility for various different reasons. Um, sometimes it's the guy's problem on their side of things. Sometimes it's both. And so just being more vocal about it was out of necessity because I have a really bad poker face. And then I learned as I talked about it more, people would just open up to me, like, us too, or we had miscarriages. The amount of miscarriages are unreal, but it's really taboo to talk about it for whatever reason. It's like, so you're telling, so we found a bunch of people in our family had miscarriages. I'm like, this whole time You were struggling with this by yourself? I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that that's the culture we live in, that you can't talk about this, because I don't know anything worse that's happened to a woman. Like, that's awful. Imagine not being able to talk about that with your closest friends and family. So, yeah, it was super hard. 4 years of us going through infertility. We ended up going, we tried a bunch of different solutions or whatever, but we ended up doing IVF, and that was a whole mess because some IVF people are like, we're going to make 20 embryos. And I'm like, no, I study philosophy of mind and theology. I can't let you do that. Like, yeah, but the odds are if we try to make 20, then you'll get 10. And I'm like, well, even that, like, or you'll get 5 or whatever. I'm like, dude, I'm not. So I have to freeze 4 kids right now? Like, I believe that they're children. So can you tell me that they're not? Like, I don't think so. So we went back and forth with our specialist for like a year and a half. And finally they agreed to what I wanted to do and not make a bunch of embryos, not be, just freezing a bunch of kids. That I'm like, dude, what if my wife dies in childbirth? And now I have 6, what I think are my kids, in a freezer, and I can't get to them. Like, why are you thinking like that? I'm like, because I'm a philosopher. I have to think about the worst case scenario. Like, if she could die in childbirth. She's high risk. She doesn't have a spleen. That's very possible. And then I just made a compounded atrocity. I do not want to do that. So, I know like the SBC has just passed something on like going completely against that method. So I don't know. If Christians have questions about that, you can hit me up for sure. Like, I'll help you walk through that and think through that. There's a way to do it, and it's not very probable that it's going to work, but it worked for us, and the Lord is sovereign even over that. But if you're going to do IVF, like, you have to do it as a Christian as well, if you can. I think you can, but it's not very probable that it's going to work out. Thankfully, the Lord used it as a secondary means to bring us about a little beautiful child. So if you're struggling with infertility, I understand it's hell. It's the worst. It's really, really awful, especially if you're a woman. Like, I don't understand that side of it, but I've seen it. My wife, like, tearing her hair out, literally. So I get it. If you're a pastor listening, or if you're like, if you have someone in your family struggling with it, just know it's way harder than they're letting on. Holidays are super duper tough. My wife would always get her time of the month during a holiday when all of the kids are around. It just sucks, or like on Mother's Day, that would happen. And it's like, seriously? And she had a really hard time with God, and she's like, dude, why are you messing with me? And dude, I'm a Calvinist, so I'm like, he's working. Of course he's working. I understand that. And now we look back, but I'm like, you should journal this and think about this, and then you can see the answered prayer as well. Like, look, he brought us through this. So I get it, dude. It brings up weird existential feelings that you don't really think about, especially in this country at this time, when we're like, dude, I can just watch Star Wars all day. And then you have this, and you're like, oh, there's more to life than Star Wars, dude. Holy cow. And I now have this deep unfulfilled desire, and it's really, really, really hard. Yeah.
I so appreciate you sharing that. I know a lot of people who are and are not going through the same thing are going to appreciate you sharing that story, because, as I said, it's just not something that you hear a lot about. Yet there are reminders everywhere in culture about the parent child relationship. It's just absolutely inescapable. And when that's top of mind, I can just imagine the psychology of what that brings up internally. But thanks for sharing that. It's an obvious case where your thoughtful ethics informed a lot of the decisions happening at that point. So, yeah, I commend you for talking about that. I do want to ask about what is next for you. Is there some other channel that we haven't even covered in this conversation? Is there something else that's going to surprise me about what kind of project you have coming up? But what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm launching a new channel called Truth Suffers, and that's from a line from Dune Messiah, Frank Herbert's book. It's an epigraph that says, "Truth suffers from too much analysis," and I'm like, this is so good. So it's a science fiction and philosophy channel where I'm just gonna read science fiction books and probably some other stuff, probably some movies and stuff like that, but pull out philosophical themes and teach philosophy through that. And it's all a Trojan horse to teach philosophy and theology, but hopefully a really good one. So I have that. I have another one called the Cosmic Equation. That's going to be superheroes in philosophy. You'd think it's the same thing, but I've learned from YouTube it is not. People who read comic books do not always read science fiction as well. So there's that. And then my most favorite project, my baby is it's called Sages, Mages, and Wisdom Machines. It's my science fiction short stories. That's a subsection of my Substack, and these are philosophical science fiction stories. So I just wrote one called Mary Saw Red, and it's about Mary, Frank Jackson's Mary, in the colorless room, and like she ends up wanting to blacken out the sun so that everyone has to experience what her childhood was like. So just things like that, where hopefully you're encouraged to go read that paper and to understand my short story a little bit better. I have one where I wanted to know, like, what's the difference between a mage and a sorcerer and a wizard and all these types of things. So I looked them up, and then I wrote a kind of a dialogue between 4 or 5 of them, and they're all complaining about how they this other mage destroyed their staves. They're like, all their staffs are gone. They're like, what happened? Blah, blah, blah. And they're talking about how the king forced them into this confrontation with this like really powerful wizard dude. And you come to find out that it's Moses and Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's sorcerers, and how their staffs got eaten by Aaron's staff. And so I'm teaching a little bit of Bible story and stuff, and you do well to read the story and then understand the science fiction or the fantasy story as well. So that's my pet project. I'm thinking about maybe voicing those and trying my hand at voice acting. So we'll see if I do that or not. But that's my baby, man. That's the taking the C.S. Lewis route and going in the back door. So that's been fun.
Parker Settecase, everyone. Where are all the places that people can find you? You've mentioned some of them, but this is going to be a list, so strap in. Where are all the places that people can find you? Or even, is there one place where all of that's collected?
I think if you go to my Substack, which is Parker's Ponderings, that's kind of the main hub where I post out stuff. You can follow me on Instagram too. I do it there a little bit, and you can see all my my highlighted stories, and then you can find, like, here's Parker's Pensées, here's True Suffers, here's Park Notes, here's Parker's Swamp is the animal channel. So you can do that, or follow my Substack. I think that's where I'm trying to post. When I post a new one, I'm trying to get it to my audience there, because that sends an email out to everybody. So I would definitely follow there, and you can read the science fiction stories. So yeah, that's a good spot.
Awesome. Parker, looking forward to your upcoming projects. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, man. This is great.